52 wrinkles ago. So, but I do have very fond memories. And I certainly hope that our show brought you all fond memories too.
Well, Pat, we're very glad to have you back. Thanks, Bash. And a special shout out to Charles Henson, who put that together for us.
Oh, that was absolutely wonderful. I mean, this is a terrible thing to say, but at my age, you know, you've got to be real. That would be a great thing to play at a funeral. just threw that out there. You know, we're all getting older.
All right. Now, I've always been a big Munsters fan, and most folks know that originally your character was played by Beverly Owen, who did the first 13 episodes, and then she left to get married, I guess. How did you get the role?
Well, Beverly did the first 13, and she was very unhappy the whole time. She cried the whole 13 weeks. She was in love with the director of Captain Kangaroo. So she wanted to go back to New York and get married. Now, you know, depending on how you look at it, I could say, well, her misfortune was my good fortune, but she's been happily married and has 2 children. But the interesting thing, they called me, and I tested on a Wednesday. They called me to tell me that I'd gotten the part on Thursday. I signed the contract on Friday and began work on Monday. I never saw her. I never met her to this day. If she were to walk in the room, I wouldn't know who she was. Never. And you know, I would love to meet her because, after all, we did share a common experience, and it would be nice. But she doesn't do shows, and and I do. I didn't get residuals.
And the series ran from 1964 to 66. Can you tell us what it was like on the set of the Munsters?
Well, you know, we had a lot of fun. Grandpa and Uncle Herman were jokesters, and of course I was the little new naive one. So, you know, let's tell her anything we want to tell her, because she'll believe it, and I did.
They played pranks on you.
Oh, all the time. Grandpa became my mentor, and he was always there for me. And every day at lunch, when we were filming, I would go to the commissary with Grandpa and Uncle Herman, and I'd always sit in the middle of them. And, you know, we'd have lunch and talk about, we all had kids about the same age. You know, what'd you do last weekend? How are the kids? And people, you know, we'd notice that people were staring at us all over. And, you know, we'd walk out and someone would say, ooh, how can you sit there and have lunch and look at them? Well, it just goes to show, when you take the time to get to know someone, you don't see any of that. You know, we didn't see all the funny gray makeup or anything else. They were just human beings and fun to be with. We became a family personally as well as professionally. We all had children about the same age, and that made it nice.
Yeah, yeah. Now, especially Fred Gwynne, he had the ordeal of coping with that makeup, the Frankenstein monster makeup, longer than any other actor had to. What was it like working with Fred? And can you tell us about? I've read that he had a terrible ordeal with that costume.
He did. The costume in itself, because the whole front of him was padded, and of course the shoes were built up about 6 inches, and of course the makeup was like a grease paint, very hard on the skin. And all the adhesive, you know, that they do to hook the head on. And then, of course, it would take him 2 hours to get into makeup and a little over an hour to get out of it at night. So that was one of the benefits of having a few lines. I got to get in my car and get on the freeway and go home as soon as we were finished. I didn't have all that to take off. And this padding that he had on was all foam rubber. And of course it retained the heat. And I can remember them taking a hairdryer on cold, and he'd hold his jacket open like this, and they'd stick the hairdryer down to try and cool him off, because the rubber was generating, perspiration, so it wasn't easy. And the sad thing was, after the Munsters was over, of course, Fred and Al were very good friends ever since Car 54, Where Are You? And they both were from New York, and they had wonderful, wonderful times together. And but after the show, Grandpa and Uncle Herman, Fred Gwynn would not stand beside Al or anyone for a Munster picture. He would sign no autographs. He didn't want anything to do with the Munsters. He did not want to be associated with him. He felt that he was playing a cartoon character. Well, we all thought it was probably one of the most brilliant acting jobs at that time, and it was. But he wanted to be thought of as a serious actor. And of course, he went on to do a lot of wonderful things. But it was just a shame. He wouldn't even, as I say, pose for a picture beside his best buddy, because if it were Munster related.
Yeah. I'm going to open up the questions. If you have questions out there, any questions in the room? Don't all?
Yes.
Oh, right here.
You said that you were hired on Thursday and you signed a contract on Friday, and
Yes.
then you showed up on Thursday?
Monday. I started work on Monday.
Did they hand you the script and you had to memorize your lines really quickly?
Oh, that was very difficult. I live 45 minutes from the studio, and I could probably have my 2 or 3 lines memorized before I was 10 miles out from the studio. I mean, it was, I could phone them in almost. Occasionally, though, there was an episode where they featured me, and then I had more to say. But, there's the perks. I didn't have to be in makeup every morning at 6 o'clock, and I didn't have all that hard grease paint on, so I guess there was a few perks.
Yeah.
But I think what is one of the nicest things is, when you're doing a show like the Munsters, you never know how you're perceived by, your fans and the public, until you come out and you do a show like this, or memorabilia show, and people come up to you and they share some of their family stories of how, as little boys or little girls, they used to come home and watch the show with their parents. Well, families they don't do a whole lot of things together anymore. And I would have people come up and cry because it brought them such wonderful memories of their family life. And so it's very rewarding because of all these other little added benefits that you don't realize.
Absolutely. One thing that comes to mind, and I was at Universal on the tour years ago, and they have on, at least back then, this was back in the 90s, I think, they had showing the various sites on the back lots, and they actually had the Munsters house, the front of it. And what struck me about the house, at least, I didn't recognize it right off, when you actually see it, it looked pretty small. They must have shot it from low angles, because the front of the house looked very small, at least what they had on the Universal lot.
Well, of course, they do a lot of things with cameras now, and, elongating things and making them taller and what have you. On the back lot was just simply the front of the house. I mean, if you opened the door, you'd be out in the pasture because there was nothing beyond the front door. All of the sets were on stage 13 at Universal. And, but there is, in Waxahachie, Texas, there a couple named Sandra and Chuck McKee, you could probably Google it. They built, many years ago, a Munster mansion, an exact replica. They researched it for years. They researched but they built the whole thing inside. They had all the kitchen and the dining room and the steps and spot and everything. And believe it or not, they lived in it. Now, that was a little spooky, but they were diehard fans. And they'd say, would you like to, when you're here, would you like to stay with us? And I in Marilyn's room, and I said, no, Holiday Inn Express sounds just fine. They have since built themselves an apartment, and they no longer live there. But what they did was they opened it up every Halloween, not as a spooky house, but opened it up, for people to see and go through. And they sprayed with cobwebs and everything. It was wonderful. And then they donated the money to charity. They'd have various charities. And I've come in every year for 5 years. This year they're not doing it because her mother just passed away. But they will be doing it next year, and then I come in and sign autographs, and it's wonderful. But you don't realize people become that obsessed with the Munsters. I mean, we're like cult. Little did I realize, when I was in my 20s, I'd be cult, but I am.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. How about some questions from the audience? Right over here.
All right. Pat, tell the whole audience, how was it to work with acclaimed actress Yvonne DiCarlo?
Well, Yvonne and I got along very well. I learned early on how to get along with Yvonne. Now, we had boys the same age, and we went to lunch a lot, and, talk about our children. But I remember my first day on the set. I was in a scene in the hall, just when they opened the front doors, right there in the hall before you go down the steps. And I was in a shared scene with Yvonne. And the director said, Pat, would you just come a little bit forward, more into the light? And I stepped forward, and she took a look at me, and she says, young lady, I want you to understand something right now. Don't you ever upstage me. Man, I stepped back and I thought, I don't care if I do the next year in the dark. But, Yvonne had been a very big star. She'd had a lot of tragedies in her life. And I just learned that if she weren't in a good mood, sometimes it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon before I said good morning, because you just stayed away. And so consequently, I got along with her very well.
Excellent. Have questions? In the back, over here.
Right here?
Yep.
Hey, how's it like with Eddie? When the other one left and you came in, how did Eddie take that?
How did Eddie
Well,
take
do you know what? Eddie was a darling kid. He really was. He was, didn't bother anybody. He was in school a lot because they had school on the set. And if he wasn't in school and if he wasn't in a scene, he was playing baseball, pitching baseball to anyone that would throw a ball to him out in front of the set. But he was a good kid. And Butch and I do a lot of shows together. And through the years, he's had his problems. And, I've seen it. I saw him deteriorate, and then I've seen him come back. And he's wonderful now. He's very, very busy. We're catching up next weekend in a show and the following. But he's done a complete turnaround in his life. And he bought the Munster coach, replica, not the original, but a very fine replica, and the Dragula. And now he travels as a package with the cars, and it opened up a whole new venue for him because he does car shows and has the cars. And for me too, I'm now doing car shows.
I'm trying to remember, either I heard this or I read this someplace, that at one point you all were in the coach and I'm not sure who was driving, but Yvonne DiCarlo was yelling about, her hair was going to fall off or something like that. Was that true? Do you remember anything like that? Or?
Well, sometimes in getting into the car, why, Yvonne's hair was long, and it would hang down the seat. And sometimes someone would stand on her hair. And it would pull it, and it would pull it back, and that was a no-no. But it did happen.
Yeah. Okay, how about some questions? Right over here.
Do you have any recollections working on the incredible 2-minute transplant?
Recollections. You knew that was going to come
yes.
up. You knew that was going to come up.
Well, you see, that's I call that my Ed Wood picture. I was the only girl in the picture, so everything happened to me. I was chased, I was beat up, I was put in a cage, whatever. And I laugh because I did the show with some wonderful people, Bruce Dern and Casey Kasem and John Barrymore Jr. And I said, they went on to wonderful things. I just went on and on and on. But that was a fun thing to do and something I'd never done before. But I can remember going to see it for the first time was at a drive-in. And I was with my kids and husband, and the kids wanted some popcorn. I was embarrassed because we were watching them. I was embarrassed to go up and get popcorn because it wasn't an Academy Award-winning Flint film. No. But I guess, every young actress in Hollywood has some kind of a horror film or low-budget film in their repertoire. So, that's what happened.
How about some questions? Questions out there. Right over here, in the blue shirt.
Any recollections of working with Al Lewis?
Recollections of working with Al Lewis.
Yes. Al Lewis was my mentor. And I'm going to tell you a funny story. Probably shouldn't, but then again, I'm old, I don't care.
Go ahead.
Al was always kind of, looking out after me and what have you. And one day on the set, I said, I don't know, something was irritating me, one of the prop guys, and I said, he's such a schmuck. And Al said, do you know what that means? And I said, yeah, a jerk. And he said, no. He said, I'm going to educate you. He said, a schmuck is a big Jewish penis. A schmecula is a medium size, and a pistola is a small one. And I said, oh God, maybe I flattered him. I don't often tell that story because I have to use the P word, but like I'm old now, so I can get away with anything. I've often said, after you pass 70, you just become invisible. Do anything you want, no one cares. Walk to the market nude, they just throw a blanket on you. I can't even get in the tabloids.
Alrighty, questions out there. On the aisle, over here.
I know that the thing they used for Spot was the Tyrannosaurus Rex and the Land Unknown, and I think I read somewhere, I guess it was in Famous Monsters magazine, that when they designed that thing, it was built to breathe fire and was later used as Spot. I was wondering if whatever happened to the dinosaur prop?
What happened to Spot?
All right. What a lot of you did not know was Spot was a mechanical tail and a mechanical head, a red light and a blowtorch. That was Spot. This was the beginning of special effects many, many years ago. But of course, when they filmed it, it looked like Spot was, because all you'd ever see going around a corner would be the tail, and all you'd ever see when the steps went up was the eyes and the two light bulbs and the flame. So there never really was a spot, just pieces.
And I think the sound effect that they used, that was in the Universal Library, the sound effect they used was, I think, from the praying mantis. The noise that Spot made was the same noise that was made in the movie by the monster and the praying mantis.
The deadly mantis?
Yeah, the deadly mantis, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
I just
so-
learned something new that I didn't know.
The deadly mantis
That's
sound that
great.
they used for Spot, yeah. Questions? Right over here.
Me?
Yes?
After you left the Munsters and started doing other roles like with Elvis, did they recognize you as Marilyn Munster? They like, oh, it's Marilyn Munster.
Was she recognized as Marilyn in subsequent roles?
Well, kinda. But what thrilled me, you know, in all Elvis's movies, he always has a good girl and a bad girl.
Right.
And invariably in the movies, the good girl was the blonde and the bad girl was the brunette. Well, this movie, I played the bad girl and I was the blonde. So that was kind of new and interesting for me to do. And working with Elvis was a wonderful experience because at that time he was very shy, quiet, he was very religious. He had his entourage of guys, 10 wonderful guys that came on the set every day with him. He didn't cause a director or anyone one bit of problem. He always did what he was told. He was really, truly, it was a wonderful experience. And I have to tell you a cute story. One day we were sitting, just sitting, waiting to go into a scene. And we started talking about cars. And I said, well, yeah, I was looking for a new car. I wanted to buy a car. And he said, well, what are you looking for? And I said, oh, I don't know. I just started thinking about going out. And he said, well, I have a car, I'll sell you. I said, really? I said, I'm thinking to myself, I'll never be able to afford that. And I said, well, what kind of car is it? And he said, it's a 65 Eldorado Cadillac convertible. And now this was 67, so it was 2 years old. And I said, oh, that sounds nice. What would you sell it for? And he said, $3,000. And I said, sold. Well, you know, I kept it 2 years, and then I traded it in for a Pontiac Grand Prix that George Barris customized for me. But I didn't sell his car as Elvis's car, even though the keychain said EP. I didn't tell them that. I mean, it didn't mean anything to me at that time. And so it was just simply traded in for this Grand Prix. Now, that was the first retirement fund I threw away. I have other stories.
Yeah, I would say you could have gotten a lot more money for that car.
Oh, yes.
We have time for one more question. Maybe one more question. Anybody? Right over here.
Yeah, the Munsters aired, and then it went into syndication. When did you become aware that there were so many Munster fans? Was it during the initial broadcast, or when it started to be syndicated and the kids would watch it every day?
When did you find out that the Munsters?
When it became syndicated, we really didn't realize it. And actually, what made me realize the impact that it had on people was when I came out to start doing these shows. Had no idea.
How many years was it then after?
We've been on the air for 52 years.
So it was immediate? As soon as it went into syndication?
No, I didn't start. I probably started doing memorabilia shows. Actually, this is a cute story. About, 30, 35 years ago, Van Williams, who's the Green Hornet, who was my husband's hunting buddy, and was also a neighbor of ours. We lived up in Sun Valley, Idaho. And Van was always going out and doing these shows. I was over at his house one day and he said, you know, Pat, you should be doing these shows. And I said, well, what are they? What do you do? And he said, well, you know, you have memorabilia and you sign autographs. He said, do you have any pictures? And I said, no. He said, well, do you have any memorabilia? No. And he said, well, do you know Kevin Burns? And I said, well, yeah, I've known Kevin since he was 12 years old. And he said, well, Dad, he is the largest Munster collector in the world. Why don't you contact him and see what he has on you? Okay. And he said, now I'll see that you get into, was then the Hollywood Collector's Show. He said, and then I'll see you do that. So I called Kevin and, oh, sure, Pat. I said, well, I'm coming to LA. Come on over, come into the house. I'll show you what I have. Well, everything I have on my table came from Kevin. And anything I may have in my little collectibles, I have bought at shows. And I don't have much. A lot of you have much more stuff than I have, but because I can't afford it anymore. It's gotten so pricey.
Well, once again, it is a pleasure
Oh,
having
thank
you with
you
us,
so
Pat.
much. Dear collectors, thank you for joining
We have somebody, someone at the door here. Our guest of honor manager that's running the hallway here, Mark Statler, has a little something for Pat. Pat, we love when you're here at Monster Bash. We really love
I
it.
love coming. This is about, well, I remember when one of your first shows in Butler, Pennsylvania. So we go back a long time. I'll always be here for Ron.
Thank you, Pat. Pat Trees, Mark Statler, Bob Pelligrino. Okay, coming up in just a minute or two, we're going to have a film, one of the greatest made-for-TV horror movies, but that's going to be introduced by Mike Adams, who will be here in just a moment. In the meantime, put some music on, and we'll have Don't Be Afraid of the Dark coming up in just a couple of minutes.